Captain Lee Do-hyun stood at the bridge of the coalition vessel Harmony's Edge, watching the stars through the massive viewport. His dark eyes reflected the cold light of distant suns as he reviewed the latest diplomatic reports. For 50 years, humans had been part of the Galactic Coalition, yet they remained the most feared species in known space. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of life support systems. Do-hyun's crew consisted of beings from 12 different worlds, but they all gave him the same look when they thought he wasn't watching. It was a mixture of respect and terror that made his stomach turn. He had spent his entire career trying to prove that humans could be trusted, that they were more than the monsters the galaxy believed them to be. A sharp beep from the communications console broke the silence. Lieutenant Kira, a blue-skinned Velian with 4 arms, turned to face him with obvious nervousness. "Captain, we have an emergency transmission from the Galactic Council. Priority Alpha." Do-hyun nodded and walked to his command chair. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, showing the familiar face of Ambassador Park Min-ji. Her usually calm expression was tight with worry, and her normally perfect black hair was slightly disheveled. She had been Earth's chief representative to the Galactic Council for 15 years, and Do-hyun had never seen her look so shaken. "Captain Lee," she said without her usual pleasantries, "we need you at Sector Command immediately. Something has happened. Something bad." "What kind of something?" Do-hyun asked, though he already suspected the answer would be the kind of something that required human intervention. "A new species has emerged from the Galactic Rim," Min-ji explained. "They call themselves the Nethrix. In 3 weeks, they have completely destroyed the Corvanian homeworld, the mining stations at Beta Centauri, and the research facility on Proxima 7. Every single coalition ship that has engaged them has been destroyed with no survivors." Do-hyun felt a familiar chill run down his spine. Throughout history, whenever the galaxy faced a threat it couldn't handle, they called for humanity, not because they trusted humans, but because they feared what humans might do if they weren't included in the solution. "How bad is the technology gap?" he asked. "Commander Yoon Tae-ho is already reviewing the battle data," Min-ji replied. "His initial assessment is that their technology is at least 50 years ahead of our current capabilities. Maybe more. Their ships seem to adapt to our weapons in real time." Do-hyun knew Commander Yoon well. The man was Earth's military attaché to the Coalition, a quiet soldier with eyes that had seen too much war. If Tae-ho was worried, then the situation was worse than bad. "There's more," Min-ji continued. "The Nethrix have specifically identified Earth as their next target. Our intelligence suggests they view humans as the greatest long-term threat to their expansion plans." The irony wasn't lost on Do-hyun. The galaxy feared humans so much that even their enemies had learned to fear them too. He wondered sometimes if humans would ever be able to escape the reputation that followed them across the stars like a shadow. Hours later, the Harmony's Edge docked at Sector Command, a massive space station that served as the Coalition's military headquarters for this region of space. Do-hyun made his way through corridors filled with beings from dozens of worlds, all talking in hushed, frightened voices about the Nethrix threat. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was already in progress when he arrived at the observation deck. Below, representatives from 47 different species argued with a desperation he had rarely seen. The chamber buzzed with translations in hundreds of languages as fear spread like a virus through the assembled delegates. Ambassador Min-ji stood at the human delegation's platform, her hands clasped behind her back as she listened to the debates. Do-hyun could see the tension in her shoulders as speaker after speaker recounted the same terrifying reports of Nethrix attacks. The Corvanian defense fleet was completely destroyed in less than 6 hours, announced the tall, insectoid Thraxian representative. "These creatures fight with a coordination we have never encountered. They adapt their tactics faster than our computers can calculate responses." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Do-hyun had read the reports. The Corvanians were known for their defensive capabilities. Their homeworld had been considered one of the most secure planets in Coalition space. Then the Vorten delegate spoke, and Do-hyun felt the familiar knot form in his stomach. "Perhaps," the reptilian being said slowly, "we should consider what the humans would do in this situation." The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned toward the human delegation platform where Ambassador Min-ji stood perfectly still. "The humans have never lost a war once they committed fully to it," continued the Vorthon. They fight with a savagery that our species cannot comprehend. They refuse to surrender even when facing certain death. That's exactly what makes them dangerous, interrupted the Pallasian representative, her crystalline form glowing brighter with emotion. Humans don't just defeat their enemies. They destroy them so completely that the very memory becomes a warning to others. Do-hyun watched as the debate continued, each species adding their own stories about human warfare. They spoke of humans who fought for days without rest, who used tactics that other species considered impossible or immoral, who seemed to thrive in the chaos that broke other beings' minds. On Kepler 442b, said the elderly Altarian delegate, I witnessed human soldiers hold a position for 72 hours against overwhelming odds. They didn't retreat when their weapons ran out of ammunition. They used broken equipment as clubs. When their armor was destroyed, they fought with their bare hands. When reinforcements finally arrived, the humans were still fighting, covered in their own blood, but refusing to yield a single meter of ground. The chamber erupted in nervous chatter. These were the stories that followed humanity throughout the galaxy. Stories of a species that had evolved on a world so hostile that they had developed an unnatural capacity for violence and endurance. Commander Yoon appeared beside Do-hyun on the observation deck. His weathered face was grim as he watched the proceedings below. They're going to ask us to fight, he said quietly. Of course they are, Do-hyun replied. They always do. This time might be different, Yoon continued. The battle data I've reviewed suggests the Nethrix aren't just technologically superior. They think differently than anything we've encountered before. Their tactics don't follow any recognizable pattern. Below them, Ambassador Minji finally stepped forward to address the council. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber as she spoke. The Coalition has spent 50 years learning to fear humanity, she said. Perhaps it's time to remember that we've also spent 50 years learning to work together. The session ended with a vote that surprised no one. The Coalition would formally request Earth's military assistance in dealing with the Nethrix threat. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, Do-hyun heard fragments of conversations in dozens of languages, but the meaning was always the same. They were afraid of the Nethrix. But they were more afraid of what humanity might become if pushed to desperation. Ambassador Park Minji's shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, 3 days after the emergency council session. She watched through the viewport as familiar blue oceans and white clouds grew larger below. Home had never looked so precious, especially knowing that the Nethrix had marked it for destruction. The shuttle landed at Geneva Spaceport, where a black vehicle waited to take her to a location she had never heard of before. Her instructions were simple. Report immediately to Dr. Kim Sunho at the Special Operations Division. Minji had worked in Earth's government for 20 years, but she had no idea what the Special Operations Division was. The drive took her through the Swiss countryside to a facility hidden in the mountains. From the outside, it looked like a research station. But the security was unlike anything she had ever seen. Soldiers in unmarked uniforms scanned her with devices that made her skin tingle. They checked her identity 17 different ways before allowing her through the main gate. Dr. Kim Sunho met her in a sterile white corridor that seemed to stretch forever. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 40 years old, with sharp eyes that reminded her of a predator studying prey. When he shook her hand, his grip was firm but not threatening. Ambassador Park, he said with a slight bow. Thank you for coming so quickly. I know this must be confusing. Confusing is one word for it, Minji replied. What exactly is the Special Operations Division? Dr. Kim gestured for her to follow him down the corridor. We're the part of humanity that we don't talk about with our alien friends, he said simply. The part we keep hidden for everyone's safety. They walked past doors marked with codes she didn't recognize. Through windows, she could see training rooms where men and women practiced combat techniques that looked nothing like standard military procedures. The movements were too fast, too precise, too deadly. For 50 years, Dr. Kim continued, the galaxy has feared regular humans. They think they understand what we're capable of because they've seen our soldiers, our diplomats, our merchants. They've built their entire understanding of humanity based on the version of ourselves that we show them. They entered an elevator that descended much deeper than Minji had expected. The facility was enormous, carved directly into the mountain itself. How long has this place existed? She asked. Since before first contact, Dr. Kim replied. We built it when we realized that joining the galactic community would require us to hide our true nature. The galaxy needed to see humans as dangerous but controllable. If they had seen what we really are, they would have united to destroy us before we could establish ourselves. The elevator doors opened to reveal a command center that looked like something from a dream. Dozens of screens displayed information in languages she didn't recognize. People moved between workstations with the efficiency that felt almost mechanical. At the center of it all stood General Jiang Wujin, a man whose reputation preceded him even into classified government circles. General Jiang was shorter than she had imagined, but his presence filled the room. When he turned to greet her, Minji understood immediately why other species feared humanity. His eyes held the kind of intelligence that could dismantle enemies without firing a single shot. "Ambassador," he said with a respectful nod, "I assume Dr. Kim has begun explaining our situation." "He's told me that you've been hiding something from the galaxy," Minji replied. "Something significant enough to build all of this." "Not hiding," General Jiang corrected. "Protecting. There's a difference." He gestured to a young woman standing at a nearby workstation. "Agent Choi Hyuna, would you join us, please?" The woman who approached looked completely ordinary. She was maybe 23 years old with the kind of face you might forget in a crowd. She wore simple black clothes and moved with casual confidence. When she smiled at Minji, it was warm and genuine. "Agent Choi," Dr. Kim said, "would you mind sharing your classification with the ambassador?" "I'm rated as an Apex variant," Hyuna said simply as if she was discussing the weather. "Psychological profile indicates extreme strategic intelligence combined with complete absence of moral limitations during conflict scenarios." Minji stared at the young woman. "What does that mean exactly?" General Jiang answered. "It means that Agent Choi can think about warfare in ways that would be considered psychopathic by galactic standards. She can calculate the most efficient methods to break enemy morale, destroy their ability to coordinate, and eliminate their will to fight. She can do this while maintaining perfect emotional stability and making decisions based purely on logical outcomes. The galaxy thinks humans are dangerous because we're aggressive," Hyuna added cheerfully. "They don't understand that aggression is just one tool among many. I've designed 17 different strategies for defeating the Nethrix, and only 3 of them involve direct military engagement." Minji felt a chill run down her spine. "How many people like Agent Choi do you have here?" 50,000, Dr. Kim replied. "Individuals who represent the absolute pinnacle of human strategic capability when moral constraints are temporarily suspended. We call them our special operations personnel." They led her to an observation deck overlooking a massive training facility. Below, she could see hundreds of people practicing scenarios that looked nothing like conventional warfare. They moved with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural, communicating through gestures so subtle that she couldn't follow them. "The Nethrix adapt their technology to counter our weapons," General Jiang explained. "But they can't adapt to strategies that their species has never encountered before. Their hive mind makes them efficient, but it also makes them predictable to minds that think in truly alien ways." "Are you saying these people aren't human?" Minji asked. "They're completely human," Dr. Kim assured her. "But they're humans who have been trained to think beyond the ethical frameworks that our species normally operates within. When necessary, they can become something that no other species in the galaxy can predict or counter." Agent Hyuna looked up at them from the training floor below. Even from this distance, Minji could see the intelligence burning in her eyes. "The galaxy has spent 50 years learning to fear humanity," she said. "But they've only met the version of us that holds back." General Jiang activated a holographic display showing fleet movements throughout Coalition space. Red markers indicated Nethrix positions, while blue markers showed Coalition forces retreating from system after system. "The Nethrix will reach Earth in approximately 6 months," he said. "By that time, they will have consumed most of the Coalition's defensive capabilities. The alien species will be scattered, desperate, and completely dependent on whatever help we can provide." "What kind of help?" Minji asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The kind that will require us to stop pretending we're just another species that happened to evolve on a harsh world," Dr. Kim replied. "The Nethrix think they understand warfare because they've conquered dozens of civilizations. But they've never encountered a species whose idea of warfare includes the complete psychological destruction of their enemies." Agent Hyuna's voice came through the communication system from the training floor below. Ambassador, the galaxy fears us because we fight to the death and refuse to surrender. They think that makes us savage. They don't realize that it actually makes us the perfect protectors for species that are too civilized to protect themselves. Minji watched the training exercises continue below. The people moved like dancers, but she could see the deadly purpose behind every gesture. They were practicing scenarios that would save lives by ending wars before they truly began. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked finally. "Because the Coalition is going to ask humanity to take control of the war effort," General Zhang replied. "When they do, you'll need to understand what you're actually authorizing. We can defeat the Nethrix, but it will require tactics that will change how every species in the galaxy views humanity forever." As Minji watched the training continue below, she realized that Earth's greatest secret wasn't that humans were more dangerous than the galaxy believed. It was that they had been deliberately restraining themselves for 50 years, hiding their true capabilities to avoid terrifying the very species they had sworn to protect. The Nethrix fleet emerged from hyperspace like a dark tide washing over the stars. Nexus Prime, the Coalition's most heavily defended fortress world, suddenly seemed very small against the massive alien armada that surrounded it. Captain Ryu Minhyuk stood in the command center of Defense Platform 7, watching the enemy ships take positions around the planet. His team of 12 humans had been assigned to defend the station's southern sector, working alongside Coalition forces from 6 different species. The aliens gave him the usual looks of nervous respect, but today those looks carried an extra edge of desperate hope. "Contact in 90 minutes, announced Commander Vex, a Thoranian whose gray skin had turned almost white with fear. "All defense platforms report ready status." Minhyuk nodded and activated his team's private communication channel. "Remember," he said quietly, "we're not just fighting for ourselves today. Everyone on this platform is counting on us to keep them alive." His team responded with the subtle hand signals they had practiced for years. Operative Nam Ji-hoon, their tactical specialist, moved to the secondary control station. His fingers danced over the controls as he pulled up detailed scans of the approaching Nethrix ships. Even now, Minhyuk could see the man's mind working through possibilities that would never occur to alien strategists. Specialist Kang, Sora had already disappeared into the maintenance tunnels that ran through the platform. Her job was to ensure that their position remained operational, even if the primary systems were destroyed. The aliens didn't know she was there, which was exactly how she preferred it. "Nethrix vessels are beginning their assault pattern," came the announcement from the Central Command. "All platforms engage at will." The battle that followed would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations. The Nethrix ships moved with the coordination of a single organism, their weapons adapting to Coalition defensive strategies in real time. Platforms 3 and 5 were destroyed within the first hour. Platform 6 lasted 90 minutes before going silent, but Platform 7 held. Minhyuk and his team fought with a style that made the alien observers step back in amazement. They didn't just defend their assigned positions, they seemed to predict where the Nethrix would attack next. When the enemy ships adapted their weapons to penetrate the platform's shields, Ji-hoon had already calculated 17 different ways to reroute power and maintain protection. How did he know they would do that? Commander Vex asked in amazement as Ji-hoon's modifications absorbed an attack that should have destroyed them. "He thinks like they do," Minhyuk replied, never taking his eyes off the tactical display. "But he also thinks like something they've never encountered before." The battle raged for hours. One by one, the other defense platforms fell silent. The Nethrix ships pressed closer to Nexus Prime's surface, their weapons carving through the planet's defensive grid like it was made of paper. In the command center, alien officers began evacuating non-essential personnel as it became clear that the fortress world would fall. But Platform 7 continued to function. Specialist Kang, Sora's voice came through their private channel from somewhere deep in the station's infrastructure. "I've got eyes on their coordination signals," she reported. "The Nethrix ships are sharing information through quantum entanglement patterns. If I can disrupt the local nodes—" "Negative," Minhyuk said immediately. "Too risky with civilians on the platform." "Then I'll need to get closer to their ships," Sora replied calmly. Before anyone could respond, she was gone. Through the viewports, they could see her small maintenance pod racing toward the nearest Nethrix vessel. The aliens watched in shock as she maneuvered between weapons fire with impossible precision. "What is she doing?" Commander Vex demanded. "Her job," Jihoon replied, his fingers still dancing over the tactical controls. Sora specializes in infiltration tactics that work on species with hive mind psychology. She's going to plant something that will make them think she's part of their communication network. For 23 minutes, Sora's pod danced around the Nethrix formation. When she finally returned to Platform 7, 3 enemy ships had begun attacking each other, their coordination protocols corrupted by false information she had inserted into their quantum communication system. But even with these small victories, it was clear that Nexus Prime would fall. The Nethrix had simply brought too many ships and too much advanced technology for the Coalition's defenses to handle. As the evacuation order came through, Minhyuk made a decision that would define humanity's reputation for generations to come. Instead of retreating to the escape pods, his team began moving through the platform's corridors, gathering wounded Coalition soldiers from a dozen different species. Commander Vex found them in Medical Bay 4, where Minhyuk was carefully lifting an injured Pelasian onto a stretcher. "Captain, the evacuation ships are leaving. We need to go now." "Not without them," Minhyuk replied, gesturing to the wounded aliens around them. "We can carry 37 individuals if we use the cargo bay evacuation protocol." "That's impossible," Vex protested. "The Nethrix will destroy any ship that tries to leave now. It's suicide." Jihoon looked up from where he was helping a wounded Thraxian. "No," he said simply. "It's what humans do." The escape sequence that followed became legendary among Coalition species. Minhyuk's team fought their way through collapsing corridors, carrying wounded aliens who should have been left behind according to standard military doctrine. They used tactics that made no sense to the Nethrix adaptive algorithms, moving in patterns that seemed random, but were actually based on Sora's psychological analysis of hive mind blind spots. When their escape ship finally cleared Platform 7's docking bay, the fortress was already breaking apart under Nethrix weapons fire. But all 37 wounded Coalition soldiers were aboard, along with the 12 humans who had refused to leave them behind. The ship's pilot, a young Vorthon named Kess, stared at Minhyuk with something approaching religious awe. "Why?" he asked. "Why risk everything for us?" Minhyuk was bandaging a wound on his own arm, blood seeping through the white cloth. "Because that's who we are," he said simply. In the weeks that followed, recordings of Platform 7's last stand spread throughout Coalition space. Alien military analysts studied the battle data, trying to understand how 12 humans had held their position for 18 hours against impossible odds. The tactics they used didn't follow any recognizable doctrine. They seemed to anticipate enemy movements in ways that defied explanation. But it was Jihoon's post-battle report that truly shook the galactic military establishment. Filed through official channels and distributed to every Coalition command center, it contained a simple assessment that would change the course of the war. Nethrix adaptive capabilities analyzed and cataloged, the report stated. 17 primary tactical approaches identified for achieving complete victory. However, implementation of optimal strategies requires abandonment of current rules of engagement. Recommend authorization for unrestricted warfare protocols. The final line of the report sent shivers through every alien commander who read it. Current Coalition military doctrine designed to minimize casualties and preserve enemy infrastructure. Human military doctrine designed to break enemy will to fight. Nethrix can adapt to the first approach. They cannot adapt to the second. Within 72 hours, emergency sessions were being called in every Coalition capital. The aliens had spent 50 years learning to fear humanity's capacity for violence. Now they faced a terrible choice. Unleash that capacity and risk changing the fundamental nature of galactic civilization, or watch their worlds burn under Nethrix weapons. The galaxy was about to learn what humans looked like when they stopped holding back. The vote came through at a 347 standard galactic time. 47 species, speaking in dozens of languages, had reached the same desperate conclusion. The Coalition formally granted humanity complete tactical control of the war against the Nethrix. No restrictions, no oversight, no limitations on methods or weapons. Admiral Song Yerim received the authorization while standing on the bridge of the Retribution, a ship that officially didn't exist in any Coalition database. Around her, the true human defense fleet materialized from hyperspace, 200 vessels that the galaxy had never seen before. These were not the exploration ships and patrol craft that humanity had shown the galaxy for 50 years. These were warships, built in hidden shipyards using technology that had been developed along completely different principles from Coalition standards. They carried weapons that other species had banned not because they were ineffective, but because they were too effective. Admiral, Lieutenant Shin Dong-hyun reported from his station, "We have confirmed contact with Nethrix fleet positions throughout the contested sectors, beginning psychological warfare protocols now. What happened next would haunt the Nethrix for generations. Instead of attacking their ships or challenging their military capabilities, the humans began broadcasting something far more disturbing. Detailed psychological profiles of individual Nethrix commanders, transmitted in their own language, demonstrating that humanity had been studying them for months without their knowledge. Lieutenant Shin's broadcasts weren't threats or demands. They were worse. They were proof that humans understood Nethrix biology, psychology, and individual behavioral patterns better than the Nethrix understood themselves. The messages included personal details about specific commanders that should have been impossible for an outside species to know. Commander Vorthak of Battle Group 7, came one transmission. You hesitate for 0.3 seconds before issuing orders that will result in significant casualties. This hesitation stems from a memory integration error that occurred during your last consciousness merge. We know about the colony ship you failed to protect 15 cycles ago. The effect on the Nethrix fleet was immediate and terrifying. A species that had conquered dozens of civilizations suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to see directly into their minds, but the psychological warfare was only the beginning. Engineer Bei Jiwon stood in the weapon control center of the Retribution, her hands moving over controls that had taken her 20 years to design. The galaxy had seen humanity's commercial technology and patrol ship armaments. They had no idea what humans could build when they weren't worried about frightening their neighbors. Deployment a pacification grid in 30 seconds, she announced. The weapon that activated around the Nethrix fleet wasn't designed to destroy ships or kill soldiers. It was designed to do something much more sophisticated. The pacification grid was a network of quantum resonators that interfered with the electromagnetic frequencies that allowed Nethrix consciousness to transfer between individual bodies. For the first time in their species' history, individual Nethrix found themselves truly alone in their own minds. Cut off from the hive mind that had defined their existence, they were forced to make decisions as individuals. The psychological impact was devastating, but even more disturbing was how the humans had developed this technology. The weapon worked because humanity had somehow gained access to detailed biological data about Nethrix neural structure. The implications sent shockwaves through every species in the galaxy. How long have they been studying us? Became the question that kept alien intelligence officers awake at night. Admiral Song watched the tactical displays with satisfaction as the Nethrix fleet began to break formation. Without their hive mind coordination, the individual ships were no longer adapting to human tactics in real time. They were making decisions based on fear and confusion instead of calculated strategic analysis. Phase 2 authorization received, reported Commander Park Ji-won from the communications station. All fleet commanders are cleared for demonstration protocols. What followed was a masterclass in why the galaxy had evolved to fear humanity. The human fleet didn't just attack the Nethrix ships. They began systematically demonstrating superior knowledge of Nethrix technology, biology, and psychology. Every move the Nethrix made, the humans had already anticipated. Every adaptation they attempted, the humans had prepared countermeasures for. Lieutenant Commander Yu Hansel, commanding the destroyer Inevitable, broadcast his weapon specifications to the Nethrix fleet before firing them. Quantum disruption torpedoes designed specifically for your hull composition, he announced calmly. Estimated penetration time 12 seconds. Detonation will occur at the exact location of your primary consciousness storage unit. The torpedoes performed exactly as advertised. Captain Lee Sungmin, aboard the cruiser Persistence, did something even more psychologically damaging. He began teaching the Nethrix about their own technology. Your adaptive shield generators operate on a rotating frequency pattern, he explained conversationally as his ship maneuvered through their defensive formation. The pattern repeats every 17 seconds with a 0.3-second vulnerability window. We've been monitoring this weakness for 6 months. His weapons fired. during the exact vulnerability window he had described, but it was the response from Engineer Bay that truly broke the Nethrix will to fight. When their flagship attempted to retreat, she activated a device that froze their ship's engines without damaging any other systems. Your hyperdrive operates by creating controlled gravitational distortions, she broadcast to the trapped vessel. We've developed a field generator that cancels those distortions by producing the exact inverse waveform. You cannot leave until we permit it. The Nethrix flagship hung motionless in space, completely helpless. Throughout the engagement, the human fleet operated with a precision that defied alien understanding. They weren't just winning the battle. They were demonstrating complete mastery over every aspect of Nethrix technology and psychology. It was as if they had been planning this specific engagement for years, which, as it turned out, they had been. Admiral, Lieutenant Shin reported, "We're receiving surrender signals from the entire Nethrix fleet." Admiral Song nodded slowly. "Open a channel to all Nethrix vessels." When the communication link activated, her voice carried to every ship in the enemy fleet. "This is Admiral Song Yerim of the Human Defense Fleet. You attempted to expand into coalition space because you believed you were facing species that couldn't match your technological capabilities. You were correct about the coalition species. You were incorrect about humanity." She paused, letting her words sink into the thousands of Nethrix consciousness scattered across the fleet. "We have been studying you since your first attack on Corvanian space. We know your biology, your psychology, your technology, and your tactical doctrines better than you know them yourselves. We could have ended this war in the first week, but we chose to observe and learn instead." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of ship systems and the rapid breathing of her bridge crew. "You surrender not to the coalition," Admiral Song continued, "but to humanity specifically. You will provide complete intelligence about any other threats approaching from beyond the galactic rim. You will submit to psychological evaluation to ensure you pose no future threat to coalition worlds, and you will serve as an example to any other species that might consider challenging the peace we have worked 50 years to build." The Nethrix fleet commander's response came through crackling, with static and what sounded suspiciously like fear. We accept your terms, but we must know. How did you learn so much about us without our knowledge?" Admiral Song smiled, though the expression held no warmth. "The same way we learned about every other species in the galaxy. We watched. We listened. We prepared. The only difference is that this time, we decided to stop pretending we couldn't win." As the human fleet began securing the surrendered Nethrix vessels, reports flooded in from across coalition space. Every Nethrix battle group was retreating or surrendering. The species that had seemed invincible just weeks before was now begging for mercy from the humans they had marked for destruction. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity stopped holding back. And they weren't sure they were ready for that revelation. President O Gayun stood before the assembled Galactic Council 6 months after the Nethrix surrender, facing representatives from species that no longer looked at humanity with simple fear. The emotions she saw now were more complex, respect mixed with terror, gratitude tempered by uncertainty about what humans might do next. The great chamber on Galactic Station Prime had been rebuilt after the war, but the scars were still visible. Blast marks on the walls reminded everyone of how close the coalition had come to complete destruction. The Nethrix attack on the station had lasted only 4 hours, but those 4 hours had changed everything. "Honored representatives," President O began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "The war is over. The Nethrix have been neutralized as a threat, but their surrender has revealed information that requires us to address some uncomfortable truths about the galaxy we share." She activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, showing not just coalition space but the vast unexplored regions beyond the rim. Red markers indicated threats that the Nethrix had encountered during their expansion, threats that made the Nethrix themselves look like a minor problem. According to the intelligence provided by our former enemies, President O continued, there are at least 7 other species beyond the galactic rim with technology and capabilities that exceed even what the Nethrix possessed. The Devourers who consume organic matter on a planetary scale, the Silents who can eliminate all electromagnetic activity in entire star systems, the Architects who rebuild civilizations according to their own design principles, A murmur of fear rippled through the assembled delegates. The Thraxian representative, his insectoid features trembling, spoke first. "What do you propose we do about these threats?" President O's expression remained calm. "We propose to do what humanity has always done. We protect those who cannot protect themselves." Analyst Lim Junyoung stepped forward to join the president at the chamber's center. His research over the past months had revealed something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy understood itself. Over the past 50 years, he began, we have conducted detailed studies of every species in the coalition. What we discovered explains why humanity has been so effective in military situations that break other species' ability to respond. He activated a new display showing psychological profiles of different alien species. Every species in this chamber has evolved with some form of natural limitation on strategic violence. The Vorthons become physically ill when contemplating tactics that result in massive casualties. The Pelasians experience cognitive shutdown when forced to make decisions that might harm civilians. The Thraxians are psychologically incapable of planning attacks that extend beyond their immediate territorial boundaries. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. These limitations make you excellent at building peaceful civilizations, Lim continued. They allow for stable societies, ethical governance, and cooperative relationships between species. But they also make you vulnerable to threats that don't share those limitations. President O took over the presentation. Humanity evolved on a world so hostile that we developed the ability to think without mercy when survival is at stake. We can plan strategies that other species find psychologically impossible to conceive. We can execute tactics that break the moral frameworks that define your civilizations. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly. This doesn't make us evil, she continued. It makes us uniquely capable of protecting species that are too civilized to protect themselves. Ambassador Park Minji, now serving as Earth's representative to the Reformed Council, stood to address her colleagues. For 50 years we have struggled with the galaxy's fear of humanity. We tried to prove that we could be trusted by restraining ourselves, by following your rules of engagement, by fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. She gestured to the tactical displays still showing the swift end of the Nethrix threat. The war has proven that this approach, while noble, is ultimately ineffective against truly dangerous opponents. The Nethrix nearly destroyed the coalition because we fought them using tactics they could adapt to. The Altarian delegate, an elderly being whose species had been among the first to fear humanity, spoke slowly. Are you proposing that humanity become the galaxy's military force? We're proposing something more significant, President O replied. We're proposing that humanity accept the role of guardian species. We take responsibility for threats that require our particular form of strategic thinking. In exchange, we commit to maintaining the ethical constraints we've developed, not because we cannot be more dangerous, but because we choose not to be. The implications of this proposal sent ripples of discussion through the chamber. What the president was describing was essentially a formal acknowledgement that humanity would serve as the galaxy's apex predator, the species other species called when facing threats they couldn't handle themselves. But there was something else in the proposal that gradually became clear as the discussions continued. Captain Lee Do-hyun, now serving as military liaison to the council, provided the final piece of the puzzle. The individuals you call special are not aberrations or mutations, he explained. They are what humanity becomes when we love something enough to become absolutely lethal in its defense. He gestured to a recording from the battle at Nexus Prime, showing Captain Ryu Minhyuk and his team carrying wounded aliens to safety, while the fortress burned around them. You feared us because you thought our capacity for violence made us savage, Do-hyun continued. You didn't understand that our capacity for violence is directly connected to our capacity for protection. We fight the way we do because we cannot bear to lose the things and people we care about. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated in dozens of languages. Some species argued for accepting humanity's proposal immediately. Others worried about the precedent of giving one species such enormous military authority. But it was the youngest delegate in the chamber who provided the final perspective that swayed the vote. Kess, the Vorthon pilot who had been saved by Minhyuk's team at Nexus Prime, stood to address the assembly. Honored representatives, he said, his voice shaking with emotion. I was there when Platform 7 fell. I watched 12 humans risk everything to save 37 wounded soldiers from species that had spent 50 years fearing them. They didn't save us because they were ordered to. They didn't save us because it was strategically important. They saved us because it was the right thing to do. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from every major species. The humans we call special are special because they can become monsters to protect the innocent, he continued. But they are also special because they choose to become guardians instead. If we must have apex predators in our galaxy, I would rather have apex predators who see the universe as something worth protecting. The final vote was closer than expected, but the outcome was clear. Humanity would formally accept the role of guardian species, with authority to respond to threats that exceeded normal coalition capabilities. In exchange, they would maintain the ethical frameworks they had developed during 50 years of peaceful coexistence. Ambassador Minji's final statement to the Council captured the essence of the new arrangement. You will no longer need to fear what humans might do to their enemies, but you can take comfort in knowing what humans will do for their friends. As the session ended and delegates filed out of the chamber, the conversations continued in dozens of languages. But the message was universal. The galaxy had finally understood that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their capacity for violence, it was their choice to use that capacity only in defense of others. The species they had feared for 50 years had become the species they could trust to keep them safe. And perhaps in the vast and dangerous universe beyond the galactic rim, that was exactly what they needed.